Hi, welcome back, I'm Natalie, and if you're new here, I do sewing tutorials, patterns and cozy sew-along vlog style videos. Today I'm super excited to be launching my new pattern, the Mabel Pants. It comes in a full length and shorts version with a few optional details like ruffles, patch pockets and a drawstring waistband. Today I'll be going through the full construction step by step on how to make the Mabel Pants. If you want to follow along yourself, you can get the full pattern and the guide from my website, which I will link below. The pattern includes a full illustrated guide with fabric recommendation, sizing and instructions on how to customise the fit of your Mabel Pants. If you love sewing patterns and tutorials, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can see more of it. Let's get sewing! I've already cut out my pattern pieces. The full cutting layout and seam allowances are included in the pattern guide. I overlock down each side, inseam and gusset of my front and back pant pieces. You also want to overlock around all the edges of your pocket pieces. The first thing we're going to focus on is our side pockets. It's worth noting that if you didn't want side pockets, there is a mark on the pattern pieces to make sure that you are either cutting it for the side pockets or without. If you're making it without the side pockets but you want to include patch pockets, then you want to go ahead and skip to the patch pocket section. If you are making it without any pockets at all, you want to go ahead and skip to the inseam section. We are going to start with piece C and piece D for our side pockets. Place the two pieces right sides together and secure down the curved edge. Make sure all of your notches are aligning for the pocket opening, and then we're going to sew down that curved edge with 1 cm seam allowance. Repeat this for both pockets. Now we're going to get our front leg piece A and we're going to place piece D on top of this so that our pocket openings align right sides together. Secure with a few pins and sew this with a 1 cm seam allowance, making sure we're only sewing the pocket opening together and not catching any of the rest of our pocket pieces. Now we're going to open up that pocket opening seam. We're going to push the seam over to the side of the pocket. We're going to top stitch on the pocket side, making sure we're about 1 millimeter away from the seam. This bit can be quite tricky if you're a beginner, so just take it slow. Now we're going to fold that back so that we've got our pocket and our front leg wrong sides together, and we're going to top stitch down that pocket opening edge with about 0.5 cm seam allowance. Your side pocket should now be attached, but we're just going to make sure it's secure by popping some pins in the side and at the top, making sure all of the notches align so that we're securing the pocket flaps to the front pant leg. I like to sew those sections with just a 0.5 seam allowance. They will be further secured in the waistband and the side seams later. Moving on to our inseams now, you're going to want to make sure you put the front leg piece A and the back leg piece B right sides together, and then we're going to secure down that inside seam and then sew that up with a 1 cm seam allowance. Make sure to repeat this with the other two front and back legs. We will now be sewing a gusset. It's also important to note that if you wanted to put patch pockets onto your pants, this is the moment to do it before you sew the gusset. Your front and back leg should be one continuous piece now, and you should have two of them. We're going to lay these on top of each other, right sides together, making sure that the curved seam in the middle, which is our gusset, all aligns properly. It's important to make sure that the back waistline, the front waistline, and that seam in the middle are all aligned. There's also notches on the pattern guide to help you line everything up properly. We're now going to sew that gusset with a 1 cm seam allowance, just making sure we take our time, pivot our needle where we need to along that tight curve. To do our side seams, you want to make sure that the pants are laying nice and flat and you've put everything right sides together as if they were just inside out. And then we're going to secure down those last side seams where the pocket openings are, just making sure everything lays really nice and flat. We'll then sew the side seam with a 1 cm seam allowance, making sure to repeat this step on both sides. If you aren't including a drawstring in your make, you can skip straight to the waistband section and make sure that you don't do the buttonholes for the drawstring. If you are including a drawstring, it's worth noting that the pattern piece for the drawstring is very long, so you can secure multiple pieces of fabric together, but to do this I would definitely suggest cutting it on the bias, as it will make pulling it through much easier. I would also suggest cutting on the bias if you've got a thicker fabric as well. To make the drawstring, we're just going to fold it long ways together and then sew down that seam with a 1 cm seam allowance. I'd then like to trim back about half of my seam allowance just to make it easier to turn through. Then we're going to get a safety pin and attach it at one end, and then we're going to start feeding it through the long drawstring. Feeding it through can get quite tricky, especially if the fabric's getting caught up or you've got a thicker material to work with, so just take your time, and as I said before, it does help if you cut it on the bias. Once you've pulled it all through to the right side, we're going to give it a good press with the iron just to make sure that it's nice and flat and sitting neatly. I like to tuck the raw ends at both sides in so that it doesn't fray at all. I just do this with a pair of tweezers to help me. Then I like to sew up that end and then just edge stitch around the whole drawstring just so it lays nice and flat. For the waistband, if you're not doing a drawstring, you can skip doing the buttonholes, but as I'm using a slightly thinner fabric, I like to just use a little bit of iron-on interfacing where my buttonholes are going to be, just so the fabric's a bit sturdier and it lasts well. I like to just make a small hole where the drawstring hole is on the pattern and then use a heat erasable pen just to mark out where that hole is going to be. Make sure before making any holes that you haven't twisted your waistband so that when it sits around the waist, your holes are going to be in the same place. You wouldn't want to accidentally have one of the holes on the inside of the waistband instead of the outside. Now I just sew my buttonholes where those markers are on both sides of the waistband. To make sure my buttonholes are nice and secure, one thing I like to do is just thread any of my loose threads through to the wrong side and tie them off in knots so that they don't unravel. I'm then putting my waistband right sides together and sewing down that short edge next to the buttonholes with a 1cm seam allowance. I like to just give everything one last check before I make the holes for my drawstrings. One trick I have for making your buttonholes is just put a pin in the top of where the hole should end, and then that means the seam ripper won't go any further than where the hole is supposed to be. Make sure you press that centre seam open nice and flat, and then we're going to fold everything over so that wrong sides are together and press the waistband in half lengthways. Now we're going to take our waistband over to our main pants, and we are going to pin the waistband around the top of the pants so that the right sides are all together, and you want to make sure you're starting at the centre seam so that's aligned nice and neatly. We're going to sew our waistband on with a 1cm seam allowance, but we just want to start a few centimetres back from that centre seam. When you're getting towards the finish and back towards that centre seam, you're going to stop sewing just a few centimetres before it, so that we'll be able to thread our elastic through to the waistband. Now we're going to get our flat elastic, and we're going to get a safety pin and attach it to the end, and we're going to put it through into the waistband and thread it through. This can be quite fiddly, so just make sure you take your time with it so that we're not damaging any of our pants. So when you get to the end, just pull your elastic back out and secure it to the other end of the elastic. At this point, I like to just do a quick try on to make sure that the elastic is tight enough. If it's not, then I can just pull it a little bit tighter. Once you're happy, just secure the elastic with a few back and forth stitches on your sewing machine. Trim any excess elastic off and just pop it back through into your waistband. We're now just going to finish sewing where that gap in the waistband is with 1cm just in between the stitches you already made before. I like to finish off the waistband with 2 rows of top stitching, one 0.5cm away from the waistband and the other 0.5cm away from the top of the waistband. When you're doing this top stitching, just make sure that you're pulling your elastic nice and tight so that when you're stitching on your waistband, everything is nice and smooth. You could choose to skip this top stitching, but this could mean that your elastic inside of your waistband could get twisted over time. The top stitching just helps to make sure everything is nice and secure. It also creates a channel for your drawstring to go down. I like to finish off the raw edge of the waistband by just overlocking the seam to make sure it's all nice and neat. Again, if you don't have an overlocker, you could use a zigzag stitch or you could use some binding. I then get a safety pin on the end of my drawstring and thread it all the way through one hole and back out the other. You could leave your drawstring plain, or you could tie a small knot at the end of it to make sure that it doesn't go back through into your waistband through the hole. Moving on to the hem, if you are doing a ruffle on your hem, then please skip to the ruffle section. You can use a ruffle for the short version or the long pants version. Before starting the hem, I like to just do a try on to make sure I'm happy with the length. I've made the pattern quite long, so you can shorten it off if you need to. I start by folding the raw edge back so that the wrong sides are together by 1 centimetre. You then fold your hem back once more. I chose to fold mine back around 5 centimetres, but you can choose as little or as much as you like, depending on how you like your hem. I then like to stitch my hem down on the wrong side so that I can see what I'm doing. I stitch my hem down with a 0.5 centimetre seam allowance away from the folded edge of the hem. And that is your long pants done. I'm now going to move on to the shorts version and how to do the patch pocket and the ruffles, as well as a few variations. For the shorts version, you want to cut your pattern pieces at the shorts line. There are full instructions on how to make the shorts as long or as short as you like in the guide. You want to overlock the inseam, side and gusset of the front and back legs as usual, and then you also want to overlock the bottom hem of the front and back legs as well. You'll want to overlock around your whole patch pocket piece, as well as one of the long sides and both of the short sides of your ruffle pieces. I personally think that the shorts look better if you make them even shorter with the ruffle, as the ruffle adds some length, so I'm just shortening both of my front and back pieces by 4 centimetres. Then just making sure that I overlock that hem after I shortened it. To mark out the placement of your patch pockets on the back leg, one of my favourite hacks is to cut out the patch pocket guide on the pattern piece. I just use a scalpel and a cutting mat to do this, and then I place it over my back leg pieces and use a heat disappearing pen to just draw around that marker. This makes it really easy to get the placement of your patch pocket right. You'll then need your patch pocket piece E, and we're going to turn our sewing machine up to its longest length and stitch around the curved edge of the patch pocket by 0.5 seam allowance. This is going to help us get a really nice curve. You then want to start pulling the threads as if you are gathering this seam. This will help ease out the curve as you fold the seam under. One of the other tricks I like to use as well is using that patch pocket guide from before just to put inside of the patch pocket and work the curved seam around to make sure you get it really nice and even. So just keep working on that seam and make sure everything is folded back by a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Then fold back the top edge of your patch pocket using the markers on your pattern pieces. You then want to top stitch that top edge down by about 2.5 centimetre seam allowance just to make sure it's all secured in that stitch. Then you should use the guide that you've already created for yourself for the pocket placement and place your patch pockets on top of this. Before I sew my patch pockets down, I just like to double check the placement and make sure that it's all looking even by placing both of my back pieces side by side. To secure the patch pockets, I like to edge stitch first about 1 millimetre away from the edge of my patch pocket, go round the whole curved edge of the patch pocket, making sure that I don't sew down that top opening, and then I like to just do a small pivot and go back on myself and use around 0.5 centimetre seam allowance, just so I've got 2 lines of stitches all the way around my patch pocket. This helps to just make it extra secure. You then want to repeat all the same steps as you do with the long pants, sewing down the inseam. Then you want to sew around the gusset and then your side seams. One of the things I like to just do a little bit differently, because this is a slightly thicker fabric, is just sew down my seams with some extra lines of stitching on the side seams and the gusset. So here you can see that for the gusset I'm going to top stitch down the centre, and I'm just making sure that all of my seam allowance has been pushed over to one side. I like to start by just top stitching a few millimetres away from that centre seam, and then I go down all the way through my gusset, and then I come back on myself using a 0.5 centimetre seam allowance, so I've got those 2 rows of stitching neatly next to each other. I then sew my side seams the same as I do for the long pants, and then I do those extra 2 rows of stitching to secure the seam allowance to one side of the side seams. For the sides, I specifically like to make sure that my seam allowance is towards the back side, so that I'm not having to stitch over that pocket anymore. I do the first row of top stitching around 1 to 2 millimetres away, and then I do the second row about 0.5 centimetres away. I'll now be doing the ruffle for the hem of my shorts. If you just want a regular hem, then just hem as normal. I like to fold back and iron down the hem of my ruffle by 0.5 centimetre, and then once that's all flat, I then fold it again by another 0.5 centimetre and press that flat. I like to just stitch that down as close to the folded edge as I can get it. Then I fold my fabric in half, and with my right sides together I sew down that short edge of my ruffle. Again, because I'm using a thicker fabric, I like to just top stitch my seam allowance to one side with 2 rows of stitches. To create the gathers, we're going to do 2 rows of stitches with our machine stitch length turned up to its highest setting. The first length of stitches we're going to be doing at a 0.5 centimetre seam allowance, and then the second row of stitches we're going to be doing at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. We do the 2 rows of stitching because this makes sure that we've got really good evenly distributed gathers. You want to get your 2 loose top threads and start pulling on the fabric to create your gathers until they are the same length as the hem of your shorts, or you can also do this for your long pants as well. We're then going to pin it to our shorts hem, right sides together, and just make sure that that seam aligns with the inseam of the shorts. We're going to use a 1 centimetre seam allowance to sew our ruffle down. I like to make sure that my gathers are facing down so that it distributes really evenly as I'm sewing. You then want to unpick the loose gathering stitches that we made. I like to finish off my ruffle with a line of top stitching, just making sure that the seam allowance is up towards your main shorts and that you're doing the top stitching along the side of your shorts. This is just so everything sits really nice and neatly. I do the 2 rows so that it fits with the same style as the rest of my shorts. The first row I do about 1mm to 2mm away, and then the second row I do about 0.5cm seam allowance. To do your waistband, just make sure that you follow all of the same steps as before that I showed you with the long pants. And that is the finished Mabel pants. I think I will be wearing the short version all summer long, and then the full length I think are just perfect for all year round. You can customise them with different lengths and different details depending on the look you want. Again, the pattern and the full guide are linked in the description below. I absolutely love it when I see everyone's makes on Instagram, so please tag me at @NatalieCorns and also use the hashtag Mabel Pants. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed sewing, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you!